Hello, Professor. My name is Andrew Lyons, and I'm here for IT 415's final assignment. My dataset, which I found on Kaggle at the link you can see, covered the arrests for marijuana possession. I'll have the link to the video. I'm going to post it on YouTube, so I should have the link there once I do that. And you can see my Tableau profile at the bottom if you want to look at my visualizations. So the three questions that I came up with for marijuana possession were: 1. Was there a trend for arrests between 1997 and 2002? Next, I wanted to know if the sex of the arrestee correlated with the likelihood of them being released. I had a feeling going in that women were more likely to be released. And then for number 3, I wanted to know, did the race of the arrestees have an effect on the likelihood of being released? I also kind of had a preconceived notion going in that I felt that black arrestees would be more likely to not be released just due to racial bias. So the first screenshot that I took a look at was a trend line for the number of arrests over time. So we can see that beginning in 1997, the number of arrests rose up until 2000. In 2001, they dropped a bit, but we can see that in 2002, the number of arrests dropped to their lowest point. So we kind of almost have a bell curve looking shape. Next, I created a stacked bar graph to show the differences in percent of each sex being released. So we can see on the right, in orange, men were, fairly likely to be released, but not nearly as much so as women, at least according to this graph. As for race, we can see an even bigger disparity. So this is a fairly similar graph to the one I showed previously. I just wanted to give it a different design, so we can see that it has two separate panes this time. So we can see that according to this graph, black arrestees were released only about 74% of the time, 74.15, whereas white arrestees were released almost 86% of the time, so 86.8. So we'll be able to look more into that as we get further into the presentation. For this fourth graph, I just wanted more context, so I wanted to look at the total number of arrests by race. So we can see that whites were arrested about 75% of the time, and the number of black arrestees was a little less than 25% of the total. And I used a pie chart for this. This next visualization, I wanted to look at a unique piece of data that I wasn't able to fit into any of the questions, which was the number of prior arrests. So there was a statistic for the number of prior arrests that individuals had, not specifically drug-related arrests, but just number of arrests. And we can see here that despite what we saw on the previous pie chart, it seems that at least for men, there's a big disparity where a lot of black arrestees had prior arrests, or at least they disproportionately seem to have had them, which I found interesting. Now to get into some of the analytics, the first we can see is the line graph, where I added a trend line, which we can see despite the kind of bell-shaped nature that we saw before, the trend line seems to be indicating that the number of arrests generally increased. Next, we can see the forecast, which again I used on the same line, so we can see the forecast. Next, we have the clusters, so we can see that white arrests at the beginning and at the end, along with black arrests, seem to stay somewhat consistent, but actually white arrestees peaked so much that they got put in another cluster, which I found interesting. Next, we have a summation, which I think gives better context for the percent released by race. And then finally, we had a distribution, a reference distribution band. So the answers to the questions, the number of releases had an overall upward trend. Sex had a seemingly small effect, actually, only about a 4% difference, because men were released about 79% of the time, whereas women were released about 83%. And finally, race played a significant role in releases. Black arrestees were only released about 75% of the time, whereas white arrestees were released about 85% of the time. So thank you very much. This is the end of the presentation.